Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 562XP Mark II chainsaw. Customer complaint is that the engine is seized up. You know, maybe it's just the starter. Maybe something else is going on and got jammed up in there. Or maybe he did seize the engine. So let's take the starter off and look at that first, because that's the most obvious problem. The 4 pins on the starter are there. You know, the recoil seems to work the way it's supposed to. Yeah, I don't think the starter itself is the problem. I cannot turn the flywheel, so the engine is seized at this time. That's not good. I'm looking at the spark arrestor screen right now because sometimes if the cage of a crank bearing lets loose, that nylon cage ends up melting in that spark arrestor screen and you can see it. But the screen was clean, so it's not that. Could still have a bearing out, but it doesn't have a failed cage. Taking a closer look, I see that there's a screw wedged in between the cylinder and the flywheel, right there. And I mean, it's wedged in there. I can't pull it out. That screw is a cylinder-based screw, and there's more than one missing. This is actually part of a known service bulletin Husqvarna's put out. And in previous models on some 5 Series, you've seen that instead of just having a screw in there, we had a bit of a spacer and then a screw. And that's what they're going back to, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But for now, let's take a closer look at what we got going on here. I want to get this flywheel off and get that screw out, and I want to inspect the flywheel and make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. So you can see that the screw that was wedged in there is still kind of sitting in there, and the other screw to the right is completely missing. So that's 2 screws that are gone. I don't remember what's on the other side. So we're just going to clean some of this schmutz out of here. Flywheel itself, it's got a couple of dings in it, a couple of scratches. I don't see any broken fins or cracked fins. I think we got lucky. I don't see any reason why we're going to have to replace this flywheel. It's not the cleanest flywheel I've ever seen, but whatever. Alright, we're going to look in this cylinder because obviously if we had 2 missing screws, we probably had an air leak. And I didn't put this on Husqvarna's service hub yet on the computer to look for error codes. But I will later, and I'll find that there actually were no codes. But I want to look in here and see if this thing ran lean and scored the cylinder. My camera is kind of jacked up. There's some loose pieces in the head there. But a quick look showed that the cylinder looked fine. There was no scoring on it. So I have to decide, am I going to replace the base gasket along with the screws or not? So everything looks pretty normal here. I'm inspecting that base gasket and trying to decide if any dirt got hung up underneath it. That's me deciding right there. There's another screw. So I think that was the second one we were looking at that was missing. And there's a base gasket part number, so I decided I'm going to pull this apart and put a base gasket in it. And you can see I grabbed a couple of replacement screws. Now this video was recorded before I was aware of a service bulletin that came out where Husqvarna is aware of these loose screws, and they're going to go back to a longer screw with a spacer. Torque it down to the same 10.5 Newton meters, and that should fix you up. Now your saw may be experiencing some weird, starts and, you try to start it, runs for a second and dies, or it just doesn't run right, or it won't idle right. All different symptoms of an air leak, and these loose screws could be the reason why your saw is running the way it is. Could it be hot start issues? Yeah, maybe. A whole list of symptoms is going to be covered by fixing an air leak.
She's a beaut, Clark.
I would say if your saw's not running right at all, one of the first things you should check is to make sure that these screws are tight. Any saw after a 2026 serial number, 2026-06-11636, anything after that's going to have the spacers in it. You don't really need to know that number. All you have to do is look at your saw and see if it's got the spacer or not. And I'll show you what them look like in a little bit here. So I'm cleaning things up and pulling it apart to put a base gasket in it. And I want to do that because with two screws completely missing, I think this thing may have sucked a little dirt in there. Maybe there's some dirt under the gasket. I don't want to torque down any dirt between the case and the cylinder. Now, this service bulletin, if the saw is under warranty, the new screws will be covered. And that actually looks like this kit right here. There's your part number. I think you can read that. The screws and the bushings look like this. Here's your bushing. Here's your longer screw. Put them together like this. And you torque it down to 10.5 Newton meters. Husky's going to give the dealer 6 minutes for this repair. So if you're going to put a base gasket in there, technically it's not covered under this service bulletin. Dealer probably can justify replacing it with a phone call to tech services. It's going to be a one-on-one basis, but if a saw comes into a shop and you're a servicing dealer and you check the screws and are a little loose, I would say that you would put this kit in there, claim your 6 minutes of labor, make the saw right, and don't worry about a base gasket. Alright, we got the air filter base off of here. Now we're going to remove the carburetor. And I'm just pulling this all apart so that I can pull the cylinder. I mean, I'd have to pull the fuel line, the throttle cable, unhook the air box, disconnect the auto tune wiring. Pulling a carb off is just not that difficult to do, at least for a guy that does them all the time or every day. So we have harvested a carburetor. I'm going to pop the auto tune wiring, the white plug, out of the holder and then disconnect it. There we go. cleaning up schmutz again. Notice I've got a couple of rags on the bench, but I still wipe my hands off in my pants. I don't know what's going on there. I think at this point I'm probably not going to be able to break myself with that habit. This is the upper AV mount. We got a screw in that hole. Yeah, it looks like we do. Both those screws were very loose. The driver did not even rattle trying to break them loose because they were loose. This is a intermediate wall between the cylinder and the carburetor. It keeps heat off the carburetor. I don't know why, but the first screw I took out is not the same as the T20 screw I'm taking out now. I wish those were both the same size. Alright, that intermediate wall is out. Cylinder is completely loose. And out it comes. Things look really good in here. Is the base gasket bad or need of replacement? I don't know, but at this point it's getting replaced. I mean, we got nice oil here on the piston. I can see all the original factory marks, machining marks. No excess wear. I don't remember what the hours were on this saw. Looks like it's low hours though. So right now I'm just cleaning the dirt from the top of the crankcase so that I can install a new gasket. And I'm being careful not to drop any inside the case. Alright, here's our cylinder. I mean, for some that ran lean, it must not have run lean very long at all because that thing looks great. I don't see any issues at all with this cylinder. So there's something else I want to point out here. Take a look at this brass ring that's on the intake. It makes the intake, hold its shape instead of collapsing. And it's a pretty important piece. And I just kind of want you to follow that ring as we go through this assembly procedure. So you see, here's our old base gasket. And we're going to clean the bottom of the cylinder for that gasket. Now this gasket is not just it's not a paper gasket, it's more of a metal gasket with a rubber seal around it, which might be the reason why a loose screw doesn't really score the cylinder or let a lot of dirt in. Imagine if it's a little bit loose, even if it's sucking air, it might not be letting big chunks of dirt past it. Alright. Cylinder looks good. Here's our new gasket. And you can't get this wrong. There's pins to line it. You can see right there's a notch, and right there's a notch. And there's pins on the top of the case. We just lay this in here dry. And then we're going to get our ring compressor and install the cylinder. Make sure that the ring end gap is in the pin, locating pin on the piston. And even though there was plenty of oil on that piston, I'm going to just put a little bit more in this cylinder here. You can see that brass ring is still in the cylinder, or in the intake, I'm sorry. Compress the ring, push the cylinder down, screw it up, line things up again, and try a second time. Now that failed attempt to put that cylinder on there could have cost me if I wasn't paying attention, because later on when I put the carburetor on, I will notice that that brass ring is missing, like you see here. It hit the floor. That's where I found it. So just something else to, little tip, something to be aware of. You don't want to lose that ring. This could have gone very wrong, trying to fix one air leak and creating another. So like I said, this video was taken before I knew of the kit with the new screws. So I'm doing it the old school way, and I'm using Loctite and the old screws. And there's probably nothing wrong with this. And if you're paying attention and doing the maintenance on your own saw, you certainly can just Loctite the screws in, check it periodically, and you'll be fine. If you want to buy the kit on your own and install the screws, maybe your saw is not under warranty or you bought it used, you're not the original owner, it's $7. The part number I think I showed you, 541378001 for the screw kit. Torque them down to 10.5 Newton meters. Here I'm just getting the screws started by hand. This is going to be the same whether you're using the old screws or the new kit. And then we'll come through and torque everything down. Now a lot of people will just crank them down by hand and do a nice cross pattern and make everything even. And that's great. And if you're used to working on equipment and you got a good feel for what needs to be done, that works. People do it all the time. I use a torque wrench on cylinders and crankcases. Otherwise, even flywheel, nuts, and clutches, I just do it by hand. But I try to take half the value in my first run around the bolt pattern and then take it to the final torque setting on my second run. We're just speeding through it here, but I got the torque wrench set at 10.3 Newton meters. And then if I go over a little bit, I might land right on the right number. So we had an air leak before. We knew it was the base gasket because the screws were missing or loose. I want to do a pressure test on this and make sure that there are no other issues. I'm so close here anyway. The carb's already off, the muffler's already off. This part of the repair, I'm not going to get any money from Husqvarna for doing this. The service bulletin is going to give me 6 minutes for replacing screws. A dealer might be able to call tech services and plead their case if there's something extreme as a result of those loose screws. I don't know. I can't speak for Husqvarna. I have had good luck in pleading my case, not necessarily in this particular incident, but other things that maybe weren't covered in the service bulletin that I was able to get covered under warranty because they were a result of a problem with the service bulletin. They're a good company to deal with as far as that goes. So here we have the factory service tools to plug the intake side. 2 aluminum plugs in the bottom. Then there's going to be a plate on the top that holds and plugs in. There's also a pin on that plate, and that pin goes into the impulse hose. Just like that. I know you can't see it. My hand's in the way, but what are you going to see? It's a guy putting a plate over the top with 2 screws. Be very careful about using the driver like I just did, because those are small screws and it wouldn't be hard to strip things out. If you use the driver every day and you're confident, maybe if you got a clutch on it, it'd be okay. Probably best done by hand though. So I've got the intake blocked off. You saw me put a plate on the exhaust. I'm going to put an adapter in a spark plug hole. There's different size adapters, whether you got a 10 millimeter or 14 millimeter plug hole. And then I'm going to have to put a different adapter on my Mighty Vac. In case you're wondering, this is a Mighty Vac MV8500. That's the part number for the kit. I chose to put pressure on here first. Probably a better practice would be to pull vacuum first. If a crank seal lip is folded in, pulling vacuum is going to fold it in farther and show your leak. If you put pressure on it first, you could fold the lip back out to where it belongs, and it's going to look like it's good, but the seal might be weak and folding in under vacuum. Anyway, my point is, it's best practice to pull vacuum first. And I know you watch my videos and say, well, you never do it that way. It's because I'm an idiot. What am I looking for anyway? Oh, here's the nut for the flywheel. Again, this would be a good job for a torque wrench. But I probably won't use a torque wrench. And I would guess that most people don't. On many of these parts, they just rattle it all together. Alright. Putting our starter back on. You know, doing all this while I'm waiting for some time to pass while I had the pressure gauge on there. I mean, there's no rule that says you got to do just the pressure test and not catch up on any other assembly. So now I'm pulling vacuum, and while I'm doing that, I'm installing this intermediate firewall. Is it a firewall? Probably not a firewall, but it's an intermediate wall. And you'll notice it's got a rubber lip on it, so it does seal when you put the cap on, the cylinder cover. It seals the air that comes in from the cooling fan on the flywheel through the starter and blowing over the fins of the cylinder. It keeps that air from blowing into the carburetor area. So that intermediate wall keeps the heat that's at the cylinder from getting into the carburetor area. The air that comes in through the starter, some of it blows over the cylinder fins and some of it blows into the carburetor area. They're kept separate. So theoretically you have cooler air at the carburetor and just air blowing over the hot cylinder. On some saws you have a window in that wall that allows warm air into the carburetor area for cold weather operation. So now I'm removing my block off tools. And this is something I got to fix. The one day I made that block off plate and I didn't have 2 screws that were the same. One of them is a 5 millimeter, the other one's a T27. I used them that day and I never switched them out. So now every time I use that block off plate, I gotta use 2 different T-handles. I'll get that fixed one of these days. It's just, I've been doing it so long, I don't even think about it anymore. Here's another tip. This tin plate that directs air around the cylinder, usually the muffler bolts will thread into that. And then if you just thread a couple threads in through that tin plate, it'll hold it in place while you get the screws lined up in the cylinder. And this is something you want to start by hand, because there'd be nothing worse than having to backtrack and restore the threads in a cylinder because you torque the screws in with your driver, cross-threaded everything. All right, we got the muffler torqued down. Good practice would be after the saw is warm to recheck those screws and torque them back down. Removing the intake block off plate. And I like to keep the screws with the plate, so that's what I use this piece of hose for, is just to keep everything together. Recover our block off plugs. Alright, and then the rest of this, putting the carburetor back on, I mean, that could be another 10-minute video, so we're not going to get into that. We just skip past it and we'll see if this thing runs, and if it does, then that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 562XP Mark II that needed a new cylinder base screw kit. Thanks for watching. Later.